The wind was as cold as a coffin nail when Jack Turner first laid eyes on the Whispering Creek cabin. Liberty, Montana, had seen better days. The courthouse steps were worn from too many auctions, too many hands gripping the wood of its rails like desperate men clutching their last chance. Jack wasn't looking for a chance, he was looking for a place to die. 12 cents, the auctioneer had called, his voice thin, barely a whisper under the weight of Jack's own heavy thoughts. 12 cents for 12 acres of land, with a cabin, a barn, and a well. Starting bid. Not a soul in the crowd moved. The men in their dust-caked boots and tired faces were more concerned with their whiskey than a piece of land that cost less than a ride on the stagecoach. Jack hadn't even flinched. "I'll take it," he said, his voice rough like gravel kicked up by a passing wagon. The town folk turned, their eyes filled with pity. He didn't care. All he had left was the few coins in his pocket and his dog, Ranger. A man could only walk so far before he had to stop, before the weight of the past buried him like a boulder over the chest. And Jack was done wandering. He had no interest in the whispers that followed him, in the way the sheriff had eyed him with suspicion, or how the preacher mumbled prayers over his soul, hoping to save him before he had a chance to burn in hell. "Sold to the gentleman in the back," the auctioneer said, his gavel falling with a finality that seemed to echo through the dead air of the town square. 12 cents for 12 acres. The ride to Whispering Creek was slow. The horses pulled at their reins as the land stretched out before him, barren, empty, save for the wind that seemed to push Jack forward. Ranger trotted alongside him, as steady as ever. The dog didn't ask questions, didn't wonder why Jack was out here on his own, without a family or a reason. The dog simply followed. The cabin was just as it was described, run down, tired, and weather-beaten. The kind of place people had long forgotten. It sat beside a creek that babbled its way through the rocks, but there was nothing peaceful about it. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jack dismounted, the creaking of his boots as they hit the dusty ground sounded too loud in the silence. He walked up to the porch, his hand brushing the rough-hewn wood. It wasn't much, barely standing, but it was his. It had to be. He needed it to be. That's when he saw it. A figure, limp, hanging from the front gate. The man's body was covered in blood, his clothes torn to tatters, and his face, barely recognizable. But there was something in his eyes, still flickering, still alive. Jack froze for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. "God damn it," he muttered under his breath. "What kind of place have I come to?" The wind picked up, howling through the trees. He approached the man slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The lifeless figure had been strung up, left to die like an animal. But as Jack reached out to cut him down, the man's eyes opened, and with a harsh gasp, he whispered in a voice rough as stone. "Help me." Jack hesitated for just a second before cutting the rope. The man crumpled to the ground, heavy and lifeless, but still breathing. His breath was shallow, ragged. "Who did this to you?" Jack asked, his voice gruff as he caught the man's weight in his arms. The man, his name was Thunder Hawk, gasped out his story between labored breaths. The Apache warrior had survived the massacre at Whispering Creek, but the land he fought for was buried beneath lies and blood. The truth about what happened here was locked away, hidden in papers that could expose a web of corruption involving the railroad, the government, and men like Colonel Tom Barlow. Thunder Hawk clung to life, but his last words were clear. "Find my daughter. Willow Gray. The truth, it's hidden." Jack looked down at the Apache warrior, his face a mixture of pain and resolve. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood one thing. He was going to find Willow Gray. And he was going to make sure the truth came out. The land had cost him 12 cents. But the price of what was to come was far steeper. Jack Turner had just found himself tangled in a war he never asked for. The evening sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks of the Montana wilderness, painting the sky with streaks of orange and crimson. Jack Turner stood over the lifeless body of Thunder Hawk, the Apache warrior whose strength had barely clung to life long enough for Jack to find him. The man had spoken of his daughter, Willow Gray, and the truth hidden beneath Whispering Creek, a truth Jack had no choice but to seek. The cabin felt colder now, despite the warm glow of the fading sun. Jack didn't have time to wonder why the land had pulled him here, or what lay ahead. His dog, Ranger, paced nervously by the door, sensing something was amiss. "I reckon I didn't sign up for this kind of trouble," Jack muttered under his breath. But troubles sure enough come calling. He dragged Thunder Hawk's body inside the cabin and laid it on the table. The warrior's wounds told a story of cruelty: rope burns around his neck, bruises across his chest, signs of a beating far too severe for a man to endure. Jack's mind raced. Whoever had done this wasn't just after land, they were after something deeper, something buried beneath the earth, hidden away like a curse. The door creaked open, the weight of the silence in the room broken by a familiar voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Jack." It was Maggie Hayes, the widow of the late Marshal Robert Hayes. Jack had met her a few days earlier, and the woman had an edge to her, strong, like the land she called home. Her husband had been investigating the very same corruption that Thunder Hawk had spoken of before he met his untimely end. Jack had come to trust her already, a rare thing for a man who'd spent most of his life running from his past. But now, in this broken-down cabin, he wasn't sure who to trust anymore. "Not a ghost, Maggie, something worse," Jack replied, his voice heavy with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. He glanced at the body on the table. "This man, he didn't deserve this. I'm sure as hell not leaving until I find out who's behind it." Maggie stepped inside, her boots kicking up dust as she moved to the window, glancing out over the wild stretch of land that lay beyond the cabin. "They're all in this together, Jack. Barlow, Lawson, Webb, hell, even Sheriff Clay Morgan. They've got the law twisted around their fingers, and now you're in the middle of it." Jack clenched his fists. "I've been in worse places than this, Maggie. But I ain't turning back now." Thunder Hawk's words echoed in Jack's mind. The silver mine. The forged treaties. The Apache land that had been sold and resold under lies. He wasn't sure who Willow Gray was, but if she held the key to all of this, then she was the one person who could change everything. Jack had nothing left to lose, and for once, maybe that was all the reason he needed. "You've got to find her, Jack," Maggie said, her voice soft, almost sorrowful. "The papers are out there, hidden away in places they think nobody knows about. And Willow, she's the one who can bring them to light. Without her, it'll all be buried. They'll make sure of it." Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the door. The wind had picked up outside, whistling through the cracks in the cabin's walls. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Then I'll find her. And when I do, we'll make sure they don't get away with this. I promised Thunder Hawk." Maggie's eyes softened. "I believe you, Jack. But remember, this isn't just about land or silver. It's about people. It's about what they've done to the Apache. You can't fight this alone." Jack turned back to the table, his hand resting briefly on Thunder Hawk's shoulder. "I ain't alone, Maggie." Ranger gave a low growl, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if he too knew that danger was near. Jack grabbed his rifle, the cold steel in his hands offering a brief sense of calm. He didn't know where Willow Gray was, or how he'd find her, but Jack Turner knew one thing for sure. Whispering Creek wasn't just a patch of land, it was a battleground. And Jack wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. With Ranger at his side and Maggie's words in his ears, Jack stepped out of the cabin into the deepening twilight. The mountains loomed in the distance, casting long shadows over the land. The hunt for Willow Gray had begun. Jack had seen many things in his time, worse things than most men would ever lay eyes on. The battlefield had taught him what pain looked like, what death smelled like. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for Thunder Hawk. The Apache warrior lay on the table, his body weak and battered, but his eyes burned with a fire that refused to be snuffed out. He'd survived the horrors of the massacre at Whispering Creek. The land Jack now stood on, the very dirt beneath his boots, was stained with blood. Jack had no doubt the truth was buried deep within it, waiting to be unearthed. Thunderhawk's raspy voice cut through the quiet cabin as he spoke, his words slow, like each one took everything he had left. They came for us, the soldiers, and the men of the railroad, Thunderhawk whispered, his eyes glassy but sharp. They came under the pretense of peace, of promises. But what they wanted, was more. Jack leaned in, his brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Silver, Thunderhawk gasped, his breath catching in his chest. The land. The treaties, forged, stolen. Our people were slaughtered, Jack, not just to take our lives, but to take our land. There is silver beneath Whispering Creek. The railroad wants it. And the government, they don't care who gets in the way. Jack could feel the weight of those words settle over him like the chill of a mountain wind. So, what does this have to do with you? He asked, though he knew the answer was coming. Thunderhawk's hands trembled as he reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a crumpled, faded map. This is where the truth lies. The silver mine, hidden beneath our land. But the documents, they're hidden too. He paused, his eyes flickering to the door, as though sensing something was watching them. My daughter, Willow Gray, she knows where the papers are. They think they've got them all, but they haven't. She and Samuel Collier, he was the geologist, a good man, a man who tried to make the truth known, they hid them before the soldiers came. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea where Willow Gray was, or even what she looked like, but now, she was the key to everything. The silver. The land. The lies. It was all tied together, and if she was out there, Jack had to find her. But there was a storm brewing, one bigger than any thundercloud Jack had ever seen. Where is she? Jack's voice was low, steady. He wasn't about to let this slip through his fingers. Thunderhawk's hand clenched the edge of the table as he fought to stay conscious. She's alive, he rasped, his breath rattling in his chest. But she's in danger. Blackwood and his men, they know who she is. They'll stop at nothing to make sure the truth never comes out. The wind picked up again, and Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the night pressing on his chest. He had come this far, too far to turn back now. He had a promise to keep to Thunderhawk, a promise to the land, and a promise to himself. He would find Willow Gray, and he would bring the truth to light. But getting to her was going to take more than just a sharp eye and a steady hand. The camp ahead was a rough patchwork of cabins and tents, nothing more than a handful of men making their fortune off stolen land. Jack's thoughts flickered back to Thunderhawk's words, the old warrior's voice filled with desperation. The mine, it's beneath our feet, Jack. But the real treasure, the papers are hidden. It's the papers that tell the story. Without them, our people's truth will be buried forever. Jack's fingers twitched on the rifle stock. He didn't know exactly where those papers were hidden, but he knew one thing for sure. They were somewhere in that camp. And the men in charge of keeping them locked away weren't going to let them go without a fight. The moon was high now, casting long shadows across the dirt, and Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. There were at least 6 men at the camp, maybe more. The time for subtlety was over. Jack had to get in, get Willow, and get out before Barlow's men had the chance to turn the camp upside down looking for him. It's now or never, Jack whispered. He stood up, motioning for Ranger to follow. The dog's steps were quiet as a shadow, blending into the night. Jack moved with purpose, his boots sinking into the soft earth as he navigated through the brush. He stayed low, using the trees and rocks as cover. The camp was just ahead. The men were settling in, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Jack crept closer, closer to the low, weathered cabins. He could hear voices drifting from inside, low, gruff voices, the kind that came from men who'd been drinking too long, living too hard. The scent of tobacco and sweat filled the air. Barlow's men were playing cards inside one of the cabins, and Jack could hear the rattle of dice, the sharp sound of cards slapping the table. But his focus remained on one thing, finding Willow. She was somewhere in this camp, trapped in a cage of men who thought they controlled everything. Jack knew better. His heart pounded in his chest as he crouched next to a pile of crates outside a rickety shack. He could see a figure in the window, Willow. She was sitting at a table, her face bruised but defiant, her sharp eyes watching the cabin door. She was waiting. Jack felt a flicker of hope. He knew he had only one shot at this. He couldn't risk her being discovered. The chaos that would follow if Blackwood's men found out what he was up to could put them all in danger. "I'm coming for you, Willow," Jack muttered under his breath. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. The creak of the wooden boards beneath his boots was the only sound in the stillness of the night. But just as Jack reached for the door, a voice rang out from behind him, sharp and urgent. "There he is." It was too late. Jack spun around just in time to see one of Barlow's men, Deputy Jake Foster, running toward him, his revolver drawn. The fight had begun. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove for cover behind a nearby barrel, pulling his rifle into position, ready to take down whatever came next. "Come on, Ranger!" Jack shouted as the wolfhound lunged forward, a blur of muscle and fur, tackling the deputy to the ground. Jack fired once, twice, the shots ringing out into the night, echoing through the valley. The men at the camp began to stir, the sound of boots pounding on the ground as they scrambled toward the gunfire. Jack's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. There was no turning back now. It was fight or die. "Move fast, boy," Jack barked, as Ranger gave another low growl, his teeth bared at the approaching men. Jack pulled himself to his feet, ready for whatever was coming next. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for everything. And he was damn well ready for it. The chase had begun. The night exploded into chaos. Shots rang out, the sound of gunfire slicing through the stillness like a hot knife through butter. Jack's heart pounded as he crouched behind the stack of crates, his rifle in hand. Ranger's growl echoed from the shadows, the wolfhound already sinking his teeth into the deputy's leg, dragging him down to the dirt. The deputy's screams cut through the air, but Jack had no time for hesitation. There was no turning back now. The men in the camp were stirring, yelling commands, rushing to arms. They had been caught off guard, but Jack could hear their boots pounding the earth. They wouldn't be disorganized for long. He had to move fast. "Move, Ranger!" Jack whispered fiercely. The dog, locked in a struggle with the deputy, released his grip and bounded toward the cabin, ready to fight whatever came next. Jack knew he had mere moments before Barlow's men organized into a proper line of defense. He wasn't looking to pick a fight with every man in that camp. He was looking for one thing, Willow Gray. "I'm coming for you, girl," Jack muttered under his breath, his teeth gritted with determination. He rose from his cover and sprinted for the cabin. His legs burned with every stride, but he pushed forward, fueled by the heat of the moment. His fingers tightened around his rifle, ready to face whatever was waiting for him behind that door. He reached the cabin and paused for a heartbeat. Inside, he could hear voices, gruff and angry. One man was shouting at another. "What the hell's going on out there?" There was no time for a plan. Jack burst through the door like a thunderstorm, rifle raised. The men inside, caught by surprise, turned toward him, but Jack's aim was steady. His rifle cracked twice in quick succession. The first man dropped before he could even draw his gun, the second stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. "Where is she?" Jack's voice was low and deadly, a growl that could have made a wolf second-guess his meal. The remaining two men hesitated, eyes darting between Jack and the door. "Don't make me ask again." One of the men opened his mouth to speak, but before he could form words, Ranger burst through the doorway, his teeth bared, his growl loud enough to rattle bones. The last two men raised their hands in surrender, realizing they were outmatched. "She's in the back room," the wounded man finally gasped, his voice trembling. Jack didn't need any more answers. He moved fast, pulling the man aside, gun still drawn, and sprinted toward the back of the cabin. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what he'd find, but if Willow Gray was in there, he wasn't going to waste any time. He threw open the door. And there she was. Willow Gray. She sat at a rough-hewn table, her wrists bound tightly with rope, her face bruised but proud. Her dark eyes met Jack's, steady and sharp, despite the situation she was in. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Jack felt the weight of everything, the promises, the danger, the truth, bearing down on him. "You must be Jack Turner," she said, her voice strong but hoarse, the fire in her eyes unbroken. "I'm guessing you've come for the papers." Jack nodded, his grip tight on his rifle. He didn't want to waste words. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, the kind of tension that always preceded a gunfight. He stepped toward her, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. "That's right. And I'm here to make sure they never see the light of day in the wrong hands." "Barlow, he won't stop," Willow said, her voice low, almost a warning. "They'll hunt you down, Jack. They'll hunt both of us until we're dead." Jack didn't flinch. He had heard that threat before, seen it play out on the frontier time and time again. Let them try. He moved quickly, pulling out his knife and cutting the ropes around her wrists. The moment they were free, Willow stood up, brushing the dirt from her clothes. Her face was bruised, but her spirit was unbroken. "You've got the papers?" Jack asked. "I do," Willow replied. She reached into the folds of her shirt and pulled out a small, folded bundle wrapped in oilskin. "These are the documents. The ones they're willing to kill for." Jack took them from her, feeling the weight of their importance in his hands. They weren't just pieces of paper. They were the key to everything, the silver mine, the land, the lives that had been torn apart by greed. They were the truth. "We're not done yet," Jack said, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the door. "We've got to get out of here. Now." As he turned, the sound of boots pounding toward the cabin reached his ears. The men were closing in, and Jack knew they were moments away from being surrounded. "We need a way out," Willow said, glancing toward the back window. Jack's eyes followed hers. There, beyond the cabin, a narrow trail led into the trees, a path that could give them the chance they needed to escape. But it wouldn't be easy. "It's the only way," Jack said, grabbing her arm. "Stay close. And don't look back." They moved quickly, Jack leading the way as they darted out the back door and into the woods. The papers were heavy in Jack's hands, but they didn't slow him down. The sound of pursuit was already growing louder. But Jack wasn't afraid of what was coming. He was ready for it. "We've got one shot," Jack muttered as they ran through the trees, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. "And I'm not letting them take it from us." The moon hung high, casting long, sharp shadows over the dense trees as Jack and Willow raced through the underbrush. The sound of their footfalls echoed in the still night, muffled by the dry earth beneath them, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before the men from the mining camp found their trail. The papers pressed against his chest, cold and heavy with the weight of everything that was at stake. They had no time to waste, and every second counted. He could feel the eyes of the forest on them, watching as they pushed forward, their breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. "We need to keep moving," Jack grunted, his voice low, as his hand reached out to steady Willow, guiding her through the thickening woods. "They'll be on us any minute." Willow, her face set with determination, nodded without a word, her own steps sure despite the darkness. The weight of the papers in her hands was a burden she shared with Jack now. The truth, the land, the legacy of her people, it all rested on these crumpled sheets of parchment, sealed away like a secret too dangerous for the world to know. But it was a secret that could change everything. Jack knew that the men chasing them weren't just after silver, they were after power, control, and the erasure of a people's history. "I don't know how much further we can go," Willow said, her voice strained from the effort of running, but there was no hesitation in it. "They'll track us down. The trail's too fresh." Jack glanced over his shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning the woods for any sign of pursuit. He could hear the snapping of twigs, the faint rustle of bushes, and the occasional distant shout. They were closing in. "We'll fight them off if we have to," Jack said, the words leaving his mouth like a promise. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, it was with the certainty of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and survived it all. He was done running. The trees thinned ahead, and Jack's eyes locked onto the rocky ridge in the distance. It was the only high ground around, a place where they could make their stand, if they had the time to reach it. "Almost there," he muttered, pushing forward, his legs aching, but his resolve stronger than ever. Ranger, ever the loyal companion, trotted ahead, his ears flicking back and forth as he searched the darkness for any movement. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that Jack wasn't alone in this fight. The howls of coyotes echoed through the valley, but Jack knew they weren't the ones hunting tonight. The sound of gunshots rang out in the distance, 2 quick shots, followed by the crack of dry branches underfoot. "They're getting closer," Willow hissed, her breath coming in short bursts. "Jack, we won't make it to the ridge." Jack's eyes narrowed. He could feel it now, the cold sweat on the back of his neck, the sharp prickle of danger crawling down his spine. "We don't need to make it," he said grimly, his hand tightening around his rifle. "We just need to survive long enough to make them regret chasing us." The brush ahead parted, and Jack saw it, a narrow path that would lead them up the ridge, but it was barely wide enough for a man to pass through. It was their only shot. "This way," he ordered, and they dashed toward the path, squeezing through the dense underbrush. But just as they reached the opening, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Jack turned, his rifle already raised. Through the trees, he saw them, Barlow's men, a half-dozen of them, spread out in a loose formation. They weren't far behind. "Barlow's not going to stop," Jack muttered under his breath. "And neither am I." Ranger growled low in his throat, his muscles coiled, ready for action. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired 2 quick shots into the air, aimed high above the men's heads, hoping to scatter them and give them enough time to climb the ridge. The sound of the gunfire rang out, sharp and clear in the night air. The men hesitated, confused, but only for a moment. They hadn't expected to be greeted with gunfire, and that gave Jack just enough of an edge. "Move!" Jack shouted, and without a second thought, Willow and Ranger followed him up the path. The ridge loomed ahead, the jagged rocks catching the pale moonlight. But as they climbed, Jack knew the real battle was just beginning. He could hear Barlow's voice now, shouting orders to his men, urging them forward. The dogs, the men, they were all coming for them. And the stakes had never been higher. Jack and Willow reached the top of the ridge, gasping for breath, their legs burning. They didn't stop, though. Not yet. "There's no turning back now," Jack said, his eyes scanning the trees below. "We've got one chance to make it out of here alive." He turned toward Willow, who was already scanning the area for any sign of movement. "You've got the papers, right?" She nodded, her grip tight around the bundle in her hand. "I've got them. And I won't let them fall into the wrong hands." Jack's lips twitched into a grim smile. "Then let's make sure they never see the light of day again." With Ranger at their side, Jack and Willow prepared for what was sure to come, the final showdown, where nothing but blood and truth would settle the score. The world was watching, and this time, Jack wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. The wind howled through the canyon as Jack Turner and Willow Gray stood atop the ridge, watching the camp below. The firelight flickered like a dying ember against the dark backdrop of the night. Jack's hands were steady on the rifle stock, his breath slow and deliberate. There was no turning back now. The truth they carried was too heavy to hide, and the men below would stop at nothing to bury it. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the quiet of the night was broken by the distant sound of hooves, a thunderous roar that came closer with every passing second. "They're coming," Willow muttered, her voice a blend of determination and dread. Her eyes locked on Jack's, and for the first time since they'd started this mad race, Jack saw the exhaustion in her gaze. The fear. But there was something else there too, something steel in her bones. "We have to hold them off long enough for the marshal to get here," Jack said, his voice low, but steady. He wasn't about to let these bastards win. Not now. Not after everything. Willow nodded, clutching the bundle of documents tightly in her hands. They were her people's last hope, the final piece of evidence that would expose the truth behind the railroad's ruthless takeover of Apache land. But those papers, like everything else in this wild, unforgiving land, were paid for with blood. "I won't let them take it," she said, her voice hard as stone. "No matter what it takes." The night was still for a moment, and then it came, the sound of men shouting, breaking through the silence like the crack of a whip. They were almost there, and Jack could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Stay low," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper as he moved toward a boulder, keeping his body pressed flat against the earth. Willow followed suit, her movements swift and graceful despite the tension in her muscles. As they crouched behind the rocks, the sounds of men's voices grew louder, closer. Jack could make out the low murmur of Colonel Barlow's voice, the one man who had orchestrated this whole damn scheme. He could hear the crunch of boots on dry earth, the clinking of holstered guns, and the unmistakable sound of men gearing up for a fight. "They'll try to flush us out," Jack said, his voice calm but his eyes narrowed. "If we can get the drop on them, we might have a chance." Willow's hand tightened around the papers, her jaw set with resolve. "I've been hunted before," she said, her words sharp, "but this time, we fight back." Jack looked at her, and for the first time since meeting her, he saw the weight of her struggle in a different light. She wasn't just some innocent woman swept up in this fight. She was a warrior in her own right, just like Thunder Hawk had been. Just like the land they both fought for. The sound of hooves reached its peak, and suddenly the camp came alive. Barlow's men were drawing their guns, setting up their positions as they moved toward the ridge. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, but his grip on the rifle didn't waver. "Get ready," he muttered. "This is it." With one last deep breath, Jack slid out from behind the boulder, rifle raised and ready. Willow was right behind him, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. As the first of Barlow's men emerged from the trees, Jack squeezed the trigger, the sharp crack of the rifle ringing out like a death knell. The man dropped instantly, his body crumpling to the earth with a dull thud. The others froze, their eyes wide with surprise, but that hesitation only lasted a heartbeat. Barlow's voice cut through the chaos, shouting orders. "Get them. Kill them both." His voice was like a knife, cold and filled with fury. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired again, and again, each shot finding its mark. Ranger, barking fiercely, leaped into the fray, tackling another man to the ground. Willow's rifle barked in the night, echoing through the canyon. She wasn't just holding her ground, she was making her mark, fighting for everything that had been stolen from her people. The fight spilled across the clearing, bullets whizzing through the air, the night alive with the sound of gunfire. Jack was a blur, moving with deadly precision, each movement honed by years of survival. He could see Barlow now, standing at the edge of the chaos, watching like a predator circling its prey. "You can't hide forever, Turner." Barlow yelled, his voice filled with venom. "You think you're going to change anything? You're just a dead man walking." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he aimed his rifle squarely at Barlow's chest and fired. The shot rang out like thunder, and Barlow staggered back, his hand clutching his side. He glared at Jack, fury in his eyes, but the fight had already gone out of him. "It's over, Barlow," Jack said, his voice cold and final. As the dust settled, the men who were left standing dropped their guns. The fight was over, and Jack had won. The papers, the truth, were still safe. For now. But Jack knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. The road ahead would be long, and the battle for the land and its people was far from over. But for tonight, Jack had one thing to hold on to: justice. The dust had barely settled from the fight at the ridge when Jack and Willow started their trek toward Cedar Ridge. The night felt heavier now, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath, ready to exhale the years of corruption and violence that had suffocated it. The papers, those crumpled pieces of truth, were clutched tightly in Willow's hands, a weight neither of them could fully comprehend. They'd survived the fight, but that wasn't the end of it. The hardest part was still ahead of them. The night was quiet, too quiet, as the pair moved through the thick underbrush. Jack could hear the creak of his boots on the earth, the rustle of the trees overhead. Ranger walked beside him, his muzzle low, ears perked. The dog knew the quiet wasn't something to trust, but Jack had learned to read the land. It was a language all its own, and right now, the earth beneath him was speaking of something he wasn't ready to face. Willow's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. "I thought once the fight was over, once we'd taken down Barlow, that it would be done." She didn't look at him, but Jack could hear the strain in her voice. There was more at play here than just land and silver. There was a history to be reckoned with, a history that hadn't just been buried in the earth, but erased, forgotten like the people who had lived here long before the railroad, long before men like Barlow came and took what wasn't theirs. "It's never that simple," Jack said, his voice low, gravelly. He knew better than anyone that this wasn't just about papers and land. There was a price to be paid for standing up to men like Barlow. It never ends with a gunfight. You can't just shoot your way to the truth and call it a day. It's a long road, and sometimes you don't even know where it ends. Willow nodded, her gaze far off into the distance. "I've spent my whole life running. I thought I could outrun it all. But now I realize, it's never been about running. It's about fighting for what's right. It's about making sure no one forgets what happened to my people." Jack felt the weight of her words, heavy as the papers they carried. He'd seen plenty of people run from their pasts, and he'd spent most of his own life doing just that. But tonight had been different. Tonight, they had fought, and they had won. But victory wasn't something you held in your hands for long. It slipped through your fingers like the dust beneath your feet. They made camp by the creek as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the clouds a fiery orange. Jack built a fire, the flames crackling and snapping as they flickered in the cool evening air. Willow sat beside him, her face lit by the firelight, the weight of the world resting in her quiet gaze. Jack knew she wasn't looking at the flames, she was looking at the future, at what came next. "We're not done yet," Jack said, breaking the silence as he handed her a cup of coffee. "The papers are safe for now, but it's not just about getting them to the right people. It's about making sure Barlow and his kind can't do this to anyone else. The law may be slow to catch up, but we'll make sure the truth gets out." Willow took the cup, her hand steady despite everything that had happened. "I thought I was alone in this fight," she said, her voice soft but strong. "I didn't know anyone would care." Jack looked at her, his eyes hard and steady. "I don't know if it's about care, Willow. It's about doing what's right. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll make a difference." The wind whispered through the trees, the crackle of the fire the only sound between them. For a moment, Jack let himself believe that, just maybe, they had a chance to change things. But deep down, he knew better. Change wasn't easy, and the road ahead would be a long one. The truth they carried was powerful, but the men who'd buried that truth were powerful too. They wouldn't give up without a fight. As the last of the daylight faded into the horizon, Jack stood up, stretching his legs. "We've got a long ride ahead of us. Cedar Ridge is still a day's journey from here. We'll need to stay sharp. Willow nodded, standing beside him. We're not just fighting for the land anymore, Jack. We're fighting for something bigger. Jack didn't answer right away. He just looked out over the land, the weight of the night settling over him. Yeah. Something bigger. And as the fire burned down to embers, the two of them sat in the silence of the night, knowing that whatever came next, they were ready. For the truth. For the land. For the fight that would shape their future. And for the legacy that had been buried too long to stay hidden. The morning came quietly, like it always did in the hills of Cedar Ridge. The sun barely kissed the horizon before Jack Turner and Willow Gray were already on their way, the horses' hooves soft against the earth. The weight of the papers was still in Willow's hands, but now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure that everything they had fought for, the land, the people, and the truth, wouldn't be lost in the wind. They rode in silence, each lost in their thoughts. Jack's mind wandered to the fight they had won, the men they had brought down, and the truth that was finally out there for the world to see. But there was still a long way to go. The marshal had promised to handle Barlow and the others, but Jack knew better than to think the battle was over. The law might be slow, but men like Barlow never gave up easily. Willow was more focused than ever, her eyes scanning the horizon, her grip tight on the reins. She had come a long way from the woman who had once thought she was alone in the world. Now, she knew that there was a future worth fighting for, a future where the Apache people could stand tall and proud, without fear of being erased from history. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" she asked, her voice soft as she rode beside Jack. Jack looked over at her, his eyes hard with resolve. "They might never understand, Willow. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting." They came into Cedar Ridge at noon, the town still quiet, the hustle and bustle of the day just starting to stir. The marshal was waiting for them at the edge of the town, his horse tied to a post, his expression grim but resolute. He had seen the truth in the papers, and now, with Jack and Willow's help, he could make sure it didn't disappear into the hands of the powerful men who wanted to bury it. "We got work to do," the marshal said, tipping his hat as he approached them. "But I reckon we've won this one, thanks to you too." Willow slid off her horse, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. She handed the papers to the marshal, her hand shaking slightly as she let them go. Jack stayed silent, watching as the marshal carefully took the bundle and tucked it under his arm. The fight wasn't over, but this felt like the end of a chapter. "You don't have to thank me," Willow said, her voice steady now, but there was a vulnerability in it that Jack had never heard before. "I wasn't just fighting for my people. I was fighting for something bigger than that." Jack looked at her, his gaze softening. He understood now. They hadn't just been fighting for land or power. They had been fighting for the truth, for a future where people like Willow didn't have to live in the shadows anymore. The marshal turned, heading toward the sheriff's office. "I'll see to it that this gets into the right hands. It's time to clean up this mess." Jack and Willow stood there for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through settling over them like the quiet stillness that came before the storm. Jack's heart was heavy, but there was something else there too, something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He reached down and patted Ranger, who was standing beside him, his ears perked, always alert. "We've done what we can, boy," Jack muttered. "Now it's up to the rest of the world to figure it out." Willow stood beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think the world will change, Jack?" Jack took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. The land stretched out before him, vast and untamed. "Maybe. But maybe it's not about changing the world, Willow. Maybe it's about making sure we don't let it change us." They stood there for a while longer, letting the silence wash over them. The future wasn't certain, but they had done what they could. The truth had been set free. It was a small victory, but sometimes, that was all you could ask for in a world full of shadows. As they walked back toward the horses, Jack paused for a moment, looking back at Cedar Ridge. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more battles, more struggles, but for now, they had done something that mattered. What now? Willow asked, glancing at Jack. Jack smiled, a slow, weary grin. Now we ride, Willow. We ride into the next chapter. And whatever comes, we face it together. They mounted their horses, Ranger trotting beside them, and rode off toward the horizon, the sound of their hooves fading into the vast, open land. The West was a place of uncertainty and danger, but it was also a place of possibility, where the truth could still find a way to survive. As the sun began to dip low, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Jack couldn't help but wonder, in a world full of lies, how many more truths were still waiting to be uncovered.